Hello and welcome back to another episode of Inside the Asperger Studios. Today on the show, I'm joined with a fellow podcaster who has a podcast all about talking with people and asking them what their favorite film was and why. He's also autistic, so sit back, relax, and grab your favorite beverage and let's learn more about him. See you there.
I wanna believe in the truth, but only see what I'm shown. Got the freedom to choose, but can't decide on my own. Follow what the group is thinking about. Let my intuition
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Inside the Asperger Studios. Today I'm joined with Jordan Rameriz. Welcome to the show, Jordan.
Hi, thanks, Reed. It's great to be on here. Thank you so much.
Not a problem. So let's start off with why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Okay, so I am currently the host of my own podcast series, Film Talk with Jordan Rameriz, and it's just me and a guest talk about some of the movies that they have picked and why they chose it. Uh, I have been I had been working as a junior editor for a company called Custom Built. Right now, I'm sort of in a limbo because I'm still looking for work right now. But on the occasion when I'm not working, I like to talk about movies and host my podcast series, and just trying to get a hold of my practicing driving because I rely on transportation services. So that's just a little bit about me.
All right, so obviously you have autism. When were you diagnosed with it?
So I was first diagnosed with autism when I was about a year and a half. And during the time that I had autism, I might not remember too much about it, but I was told that I had trouble speaking with other, my peers or my classmates or with other people around me.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to speak Spanish when I was very, very young, like when I was an infant, when I understood it. But then I sort of lost communication with speaking Spanish because almost all of my family members, my dad, my mom, my grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins, they speak Spanish, but I was one of the few members who didn't understand it. So for me, it was like the classic symptoms, being unable to respond. I would always make sounds. I would always get distracted. I'll always overthink
Mm-hmm.
and difficulty in making the right decisions on my own, and also difficulty in becoming independent. So that for me was what it was like living with autism and also not being. I mean, I was told I could make decisions on my own, but it's difficult to make those decisions when I am living with this neurodivergent disorder.
All right. Now, growing up, did you feel you were different from everyone else?
I did feel that way because whenever I would, let's say, try to make friends outside of my comfort zone, sometimes I feel like I have difficulty in, as I mentioned before, talking about whatever it was, or on some occasions, I would occasionally talk to myself, and it would start to make my classmates a little bit, worried about whether or not I was okay. And sometimes I would be embarrassing myself, whether it was, like bodily autonomy, like maybe passing gas or anything like that, that was embarrassing to me. To me, it felt embarrassing. Um, or or saying inappropriate things that you're not supposed to say when you're in school. But yeah, it for me growing up, it made me feel like the odd person out.
All
Um,
right.
when you're going from grade school to middle school.
All right. Now, obviously, you were diagnosed young, but growing up, did you think everyone else is different than you? Did you start to see things differently? When you started getting older, did you realize you're seeing things differently than everyone else is seeing it and thinking, why do they think this and I think that?
So I would say it may have started when I was going from grade school to middle school, because when I was in grade school, I used to have a really difficult time with in Florida, we have what is known as the FCAT system, which is basically like your standardized tests. And the choices were extremely difficult. And I know at the time I was not as intelligent as my other classmates have made me believe. But when I was in middle school, I would like watch different programming or read different books. And that started getting me thinking, as you mentioned before, that's when I started to notice, the kids in my classes, they started thinking one way, like what was cool, what was popular, what was playing at the movies or what was on TV. And then I would start watching like older movies and maybe older TV shows, and I started seeing things in another light.
Hmm.
And that got me thinking, if I looked at it from the way I see it versus maybe somebody who does not like to watch the older stuff because it doesn't feel like something that they like, um, then that was my way of saying, um, maybe that's one way I see things differently than other people do. And at that time, I was not a book person. I was not like a literary person. It didn't occur until maybe I was in middle or high school. Actually, I think in high school, that was when I started to become very literary and I started becoming more active, like in the news and in politics, like watching politics every day. So yeah, I started thinking differently than maybe my other peers would do when I was growing up, going from high school all the way to when I was in college.
Now, what was it like going through high school and college, dealing with autism? Because I know for myself, it was a struggle.
Yes. For me, I would say it was a little bit similar. I mean, the high school I went to was like a private school, but for students with special needs. So I went to this place called Pepin Academies when I was in middle school. My mom and dad were very supportive because they wanted me to be around other kids who had disorders like learning disorders or neurodivergent disorders. And I thought that made me feel much more comfortable and safe being around these other kids. Going in high school, it was a little bit difficult in struggling with understanding, basic mathematics or science or those types of
Mhm.
subjects. But when it came to like, having to be a part of a club, to be with other students, for me, it was like I felt really comfortable to be with people whom I got in touch with and friends that I wanted to be with. Uh, and then when I went to college, it was sort of the same thing because I was part of what was the broadcasting club in college. And, I was sort of like trying to understand the ins and outs of what I had to do as a member of the club. But at the same time, when you're sort of like a co-leader, it's a struggle because you're having to figure out what a leader would do versus being a member. So that was where I struggled. It was with my leadership skills rather than as a member of a club. So, um, when I had to speak in front of other members, or when I had to make decisions that would benefit the club, or whenever I have to think about what we need to do next or that, it's like I had struggled with things like that.
Now, when you got into college, how did you manage
Mhm.
it? Was it community college? Was it an actual four-year university where you stay in dorms? And if it was that, how did you handle the whole workplace situation?
Okay. So first I started at a community college, and then afterwards I went to the University of South Florida. I went there for 2 years. So first, when I was at a community college, I didn't have a workplace environment. That wasn't until I graduated. No, no, I take it back. I did have something similar to a workplace environment. It was working at the college's very own radio station. It was like working to do my own radio show. I had to learn about the mechanics of working in my own little control room with all the buttons and whatnots. And I had a laptop in front of me so that I could play whatever music I needed to do. And then when I was at USF, it was sort of like a part-time job, but it was for, oh, excuse me, I had to adjust my microphone here a bit. Okay. But when I was at USF, I had to attend sort of like a part-time position where I had to learn how to edit and I had to juggle between doing a part-time position and my classes because it was difficult at first for me to figure out how I can be able to attend my classes
Mhm.
while I was able to go to work at the same time. So it was like I had to come up with a schedule and a reminder, and I had to be well organized. So that was when I first was aware of organization skills that I needed to work on. And plus, because I was still practicing my driving skills, I would have to, instead of, driving a car, I would have to take like a bus to go from one place to another.
All right. Now, let's go back a little bit to your life. What is it like for you to live with autism?
So for me to live with autism, at first I thought to myself, I was not like the other kids. I thought I wasn't doing things like, how other kids would try to do things that were, fun and exciting, and they get to do all these cool things like making their own movies or doing their own artwork or doing whatever it is that they needed in those types of skills to make it in the outside world. And for me, it felt like I didn't have that because I struggle with trying to find out on my own what is my identity? What is it that I want to do with my life? And for me to be able to figure out what is my identity? What is it that I want to do? That's one of the struggles I have with autism because it's like you have to pick and choose your own career. You pick and choose your own path, but it can go in so many different directions that it's like, I don't know where I go to. So for me, that's what it felt like with autism. So many opportunities, but you had to pick one. It's really that difficult for me to live with that.
Right. Now, what challenges do you face with your having autism?
So the challenges I face, because oh, excuse me. So the challenges I face right now is I'm still practicing my driving, but I always have this fear of wanting to succeed, but at the same time, I'm so overly cautious with if I'm not going to make it or not because I overthink many things. So that's one of the things I have trouble with. The other thing I have trouble with is becoming independent. I want to be independent. I want to have a place of my own. I want to make a life for myself, but at the same time, I also have to figure out what jobs are there for me that I want to do, that I don't face discrimination because of my disability, because I could be manipulated or abused, or that I could be exploited. And number three, the one thing I always have to think of is what goals would I have to say for myself? What kind of career would I want to have? What kind of job do I want to have? That's the one other thing that I struggle with, because whenever I'm asked, what type of job do I want to have? What type of career do I want to have? Where do I see myself in X years? That's the other thing I struggle with. And those are like the three main challenges that I face as a person diagnosed with autism.
All right, let's work on that for a minute here. Um, Usually, the best way to find out what a good job for you is, you want to focus on your special interests. What is
Mhm.
your special interest?
My special interest is working on my laptop and working in computing and something like coding skills. And also because I originally wanted to work in the entertainment industry, I sort of lost interest because of how things can rapidly move and change real quickly. I decided something like social media marketing may be something to my advantage because I'm good at computing. I'm good at working on the computer, and I try to see whatever is the newest trends going on in the social media marketing industry right now. So those are something So those are just some of the interests that I see myself in as I look at myself in this mirror.
All right, so you're good at programming.
Yes.
What about looking for a job in programming and like in gaming companies and big name hardware companies like IBM, Hewlett Packard, any computer company would be, or any software company would always looking for programmers.
Hmm.
Or why not becoming your own programmer? Create your own
So
company.
yes. That's the one thing I would like to do because I like the one thing that I always like to do is right now I have my own blog website. I have my own I have my own YouTube channel and I have my own podcast show, but I never thought of doing something like that, coding or programming before, because I used to think that the best jobs would be somewhere in the entertainment business, but now because every job is going to the tech industry, I thought maybe I should change careers, going from one thing that I liked to another. Maybe that could be something that
Yeah, I
could get
mean,
me.
I got a good friend who's always told me, who's autistic as well. He had told me in regards to another friend who had trouble finding work, he's like, do something you love and keep doing it until someone notices and hires you to do that.
Hmm.
I mean, I'll give you a great example. I couldn't find work and I haven't found work for over 10 years.
Mm.
I've had few jobs. I was great in IT support.
Hmm.
Um, and then after that, I couldn't find work no matter what I did. I
Hmm.
volunteered here and there, and that never panned off. But I decided to go for my degree. So I have two
Mm.
degrees in both ends of the computer industry.
Mm.
That didn't get me anywhere,
Mm.
but it did get me travel.
Oh, wow.
But it didn't get me jobs.
Mm.
So my mother had said to me, why not podcast and blog? So I
Mm.
started my blog and that took off, but it didn't get the traction I needed.
Mm.
Though you know, those in the community of ours are very skeptical, very paranoid a little bit, very much introverted, don't want to socialize, don't want to like communicate with you. Just they just want to watch, listen, and learn.
Hmm.
So, and they were starting to use fake email addresses and it was ruining my account.
Hmm.
So I switched over to podcasting and all of a sudden I'm it's like it's blown up.
Hmm.
I've been doing it for over 3 years, made many friends through it. A lot of people want to come back. A lot of people have become good friends of mine, and it's become a passion and my special interest. I mean, I have many special interests.
Mm.
I mean, that brings me to a good question is, do you have ADHD as well?
Yes, I do. I I I always see myself as somebody with ASD, but I never thought of myself as having ADHD. So.
So we're both AUDHDers, which it makes things harder on us because of that ADHD, it's hard to focus on one job that we love because we get tired after a while and we want to move on.
Hmm.
But if we do something we truly love, we're going to keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it.
Yes,
Have you thought about
absolutely.
monetizing your podcast?
I was thinking about monetizing my podcast, but the problem was every time I put in a new episode, it just because I only could do it on one channel, which was on Spotify, and not all the other channels like Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or
Hmm.
any of those places. It got harder and harder for me to reach that audience. So
All
Apple
right.
Podcasts was one of the main prop issues I had with trying to reach my audience out there
All
because.
right. Let me give you some advice. Find yourself a podcast host.
Hmm.
If you got to pay for it because it's well worth the money.
Yeah.
Um, the bigger name hosts, like the one I'm using, OSHA,
Okay.
Podbeam,
Hmm.
they will disperse it to all they have a distribution part where they will distribute your podcast to all the other pod people like Spotify, Apple. Deezer and all the other ones. They will distribute it to there, so you don't have to worry. All
Mm-hmm.
you got to do is be consistent with your episodes. Have them.
Mm-hmm.
How often do you put them up?
So I put them up every Friday at 4 in the afternoon. So I always do it ahead of time. So that's where the episodes go.
All right, so all you got to do is remind people at the end of every episode to please like and subscribe and start a Patreon and start pushing that. Once you build yourself up a guest list,
Mm-hmm.
send an email out to all of them
Mm-hmm.
and say, and that's what I just did actually. I mean, it's been a while and I used Zoom and I took all the emails and I sent out an email to everyone that's been on my show and I thanked them for coming on my show and I said, "Hey, listen, why don't you I could really use some help and support if you guys would subscribe to my Patreon. That would be truly helpful. It would help me get more and more guests and more better equipment. And also, please leave a review on Apple
Mm-hmm.
Podcasts for me.
Yes. Um, I like the advice that you have given me. Thank you so much.
Not a problem. I mean, it's important to to get your guests out there, to
Mm-hmm.
let them know. I mean, do you thank them at the end of every episode and tell them how much there was a good show and everything else like that, or do you just hit end and that's it?
No, before I end the episode, I always thank them for being on the show and for the films that they recommended. And we always keep in contact with each other no matter what. I still have like their emails and I keep in touch with them on Facebook. And I always say to myself, if they ever need to come back, they're always welcome to come back and share whatever else that they needed to discuss on the last episode.
That's great.
Yes.
Now, let's move on a little bit more about you. What
Okay.
is the hardest thing about being autistic?
The hardest thing about being autistic for me is always trying to uh I think the hardest thing about being autistic for me is always trying to leave the leave my household and just trying to you know figure out what it's like to become immersed in whatever it is that I wanted to see or think about. So yeah, it's basically trying to get out of your comfort zone and
Hmm.
trying to do something that you're not so used to doing, is what I'm saying. It's the hardest thing about me as a person with autism.
Then I will recommend one big thing to you.
Mm-hmm.
I just wrote a book. It's
Okay.
in editing. When it comes out, I highly recommend you pick it up. It's
Okay.
basically my life, following me from beginning of being diagnosed, put on medicine, all the way through to where I am now, with advice and stories with one big informational tip, which is you got to step out of your comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't just say you have to do it. I give advice on how to do it. I say
Mm-hmm.
do little things
Okay.
because no matter what you do, it still counts as something you've done.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how did you get into podcasting?
I got into podcasting because I started listening to like entertainment podcasts or movie podcasts, or maybe sometimes current events podcasting. And when I started becoming hooked on it, I thought this could be the way that I would get my voice out there because there are some
Mm,
really interesting podcasts that I thought, well, movie related podcasts that I thought maybe if I did it from my perspective as somebody with autism, I could talk about like something similar to how a movie host would ask them, what was it like, or why did you choose this movie? What was the connection between you and this movie? Sort of like I wanted to reach out to them and do things the way I wanted to do it. Because when I did my radio show at HCC, it was sort of like a continuation of that, but I just wanted
mhm.
to, instead of talking to myself and just talking about the movies I picked, I thought I wanted to reach out to other people and think about what their movie picks are because I always like to think about what other people think instead of just having me on and talk about what I think and just
Mhm.
listen to what they think.
How do you choose your guests?
I choose my guests based on putting out like a registration. It's like a form that I put out because I was on a Facebook chat group where you could just put out a registration form and you could ask them specific questions, and you would have to ask them what movie they picked and why they should see this movie, even if it's considered their favorite or if it's a movie that it does. The way I choose my criteria is you don't have to pick a movie that is so obscure that people will not know what it is. It's basically just choose whatever movie you pick. It could be a mainstream movie, an international movie, a cult movie, whatever. It's basically I choose them based on that, and also what is it that this person does? Do they have a business that they run? Do they have a podcast that they host? Uh, do they work for a big industry that made them choose where they wanted to go, maybe based on this movie that they've seen, or maybe based on something that they like. So that's how I choose my guests, and I choose them wisely instead of waiting until the last minute.
All right. Now, do you remember your first episode?
So my first episode was in 2022,
Mm.
and it was a movie that I saw called Julie with Doris Day. And my first episode with a guest that I had on my podcast was in 2024, early this year, and it was for a film called Arrival. And it was my first time viewing that movie, and I had a guest on who was a podcaster, and he talked extensively about why he picked this movie, what was it about this film that connected with him, and so on and so forth. And it was a really great chat that we had. So I continued from then on just to have guests on my podcast so that it wouldn't just be me talking, but it would
Hmm.
just be somebody else discussing the movie themselves.
I find it very helpful having another person on because when you're somebody listening
Mm-hmm.
and you're talking about movies or you're talking about autism or ADHD, you don't want to hear the person side. You want to hear them talk with an expert and hear what the expert has to say. Or in your case, what that person has to say about their movie and why they
Mm-hmm.
chose it.
Yeah.
It gives it more solidity, if that makes sense. It gives it
Yes.
more it gives it more control over why that person's listening to them because it's not just you voicing your opinion, but
Mm-hmm.
it's somebody else who has a favorite movie who may not even be part of the movie industry or just be some random person who fell in love with this movie and they talk about why.
Mm-hmm.
Because I find that people rather hear not your opinion, but they rather hear a guest's opinion because it makes it more interesting.
It is. That's why I chose. I didn't make the podcast just because I wanted like big named actors or big name podcasters to come. I mean, it would be nice. But I only wanted to find the people that I could find on the Facebook group chat who would be able to, as you mentioned, share their opinions. And as I said before, it didn't have to be anybody from the film industry. It could be, as you mentioned, anybody from outside the industry who may have a favorite that they liked, who may talk about films that they saw from when they were a child or when they were an adult, and what got them interested in seeing this movie and talking about what were some of the specifics. And I wasn't going to be like one of those techie type guys where I would just nitpick every movie here and there. I mean, sometimes I would, but I would try to avoid doing that. But I just want them to talk through the podcast episode without me interrupting them, even if it's something minuscule.
All right. Do you have a favorite episode?
Do I have a favorite episode of the podcast? Okay, maybe I have a few. Um, I have one where I had a another person who is autistic like me named Caden. He's from Ohio, and he picked a film that came out last year. Oh my goodness. Ruby something, Sea Kraken or something like that. It was that DreamWorks movie that came out a few years ago. Oh, Ruby Gillman, Teenage Kraken. That was the movie. And he talked about why he chose this movie and why a person with autism would view the character as somebody connected with that community because the character may have some sort of like inability to communicate, or maybe there's a connection between how to fit in if they are introverted. So that was one of my favorite episodes. And the other favorite that I think I liked was with a another YouTuber, Courtney Hughes, and we talked about The Wizard of Oz, and she came back for my Halloween episode to talk about a movie that she liked called I Married a Witch, which I thought was a really fun sort of Halloween type movie to watch.
All right. Now, let's go back to you for a few minutes. How hard is it for you to make friends?
How hard is
And
it
do,
me to make okay,
and do you have any?
I do. For me, if I had to rate myself how hard it is to make friends, I would say about maybe 6 to 7, because the one thing I always know about myself is that whenever I try to reach out to somebody,
Mm-hmm.
I'm I always have this fear of maybe they don't like me. Maybe
Mm,
if I speak out to them, I would get a harsh reaction from them, and maybe that would upset somebody because maybe there's something about me that sets them off quite too much because they like this hobby or that or these skills, and I like this skill or that hobby. So that's the one thing that I always have trouble with making friends. And for making new friends, I have a few that I have kept in touch with. I still keep in touch with them on Facebook, and I still keep in touch with them whenever I'm on the phone. So I
mhm.
still have some remaining friends with me, the ones that I made when I was in high school and college and when I was podcasting. So I still keep in touch with some people.
All right. Now, do you have any sensory issues at all?
Any sensory issues?
Mm-hmm.
The only issues I have are I think this is very common. Bright lights sometimes tend to make me feel irritated, and loud noises. Loud noises all are also something that make me feel sensitive as well as the bright lights. So those are just some of the issues that I have. And I think the issue of I always overthink maybe of somebody looking at me or staring at me because whenever I feel like I'm staring at somebody, I feel like maybe I'm scaring that person, or maybe it just upsets them that I do this. So those are just some of the sensory issues that I have.
All right. Now, do you have a favorite movie and why is it your favorite movie?
Um, do I have a favorite movie? Okay, I do have a few. But for this one, I'll just name like two. Um, the first one I liked was watching Gone with the Wind, and it's a film that I remembered watching. I knew every line, I knew every scene, and it was a film that it's even though people consider it a classic, it also has issues of its own because some of the things as I watch it as a viewer, I find somewhat problematic, but it was a product of its time is what I will say. But I just love it because of its acting and because of its storytelling. And the other film that I thought was sort of a new rediscovery for me was Here Comes Mr. Jordan with Claude Rains and Robert Montgomery because it's a supernatural drama involving somebody who has died and is now in the body of a dead millionaire. It basically is the premise for the movie Heaven Can Wait with Warren Beatty, with for those who have never seen it. But it's one of my favorite films, and I love it because of its comedy, because it's a lighthearted film, and I also am a Claude Rains fan because when I looked him up on any biography of any film actor in the industry, he had a stuttering issue when he was very young and he had difficulty speaking. And when he acted, I barely noticed his stutter,
Mm,
which made me say if he could, you know, overcome his fear of, any issue that he had as a child or as an adult through another medium, then maybe I could do something with what I can in this medium too. So that made me think about it.
Well, I mean, that reminds me, have you ever seen the movie The King's Speech?
I have seen that film.
Yeah, well, that's like the same premise.
Yes. The issue of one person's stutter that preventing them from public speaking.
Hmm.
But yeah, I always view people who have issues like that or with any issue regarding making conversation as somewhat inspirational, and also it makes me feel like I'm not the only person who may have issue having conversation or making new friends.
All right. Now, what advice do you have for those who are finding out that they're autistic?
For anybody who has autism or any person who needs advice, I would say just find the passion that you love, and make sure that you do it with great love and with great care, because you don't know what your career or your path may take you. But if you find a skill or a hobby that you have interest in, use it. Take whatever skill you have, take whatever likes of, anything that you wanted to do, to create, to write, to compute, to whatever industry you do, make sure to use your skills very well. Make sure that you don't, have any issues at all. Overcome your fears, overcome any problems or situations that are ahead of you. And you have to stick with a community that you want to be a part of. Being part of a community, being part of any person whom you want to connect to, and always make sure that you have to make new friends or anything like that. So that's just my advice to anybody. Just make new friends, be a part of a community, overcome your fears, and making sure that you find whatever skills you have that it can set you on the right path to a career or a job that you want to be a part of.
And finally, where can people find out more about you and your podcast?
So my podcast is Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez. You can check me on my podcast on Spotify, and I also have my YouTube channel, Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez. You can check me on every Friday at 4 o'clock. And you can also go to my blog post at filmtalkwithjordanramirez.podcast.wordpress.com. So that's where you can find me. And if you have any interesting story that you want to tell about a movie you have picked, or if there's a movie that connects like with a disorder, maybe a disorder that you have, or maybe struggles that you have, I'm fine with that too, as long as you share your story. So that's where you can find me. I'm also available on Blue Sky, on Instagram, and on Facebook. So that's where you can find me as well.
And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Reed Miles. That was Jordan Ramirez. And I want to remind everybody to please like, subscribe, and even sign up to my Patreon. And I'll see you in the next one. See you there, everybody. Thank you, Jordan.
Thank you so much, Reed. It was great being on the show.